Ubermensch, the Uber, the supreme will, right?
What?
So I'm going to impose my will as much as I can. You'll do the same thing. What do we have? A conflictual society. Again, welcome to much of wokeism.
What will are our woke people imposing on other people? Like what am I saying that other people cannot do? I'd love an answer to that. So if you couldn't tell by my weeb/Christmas attire, it was recently Christmas, 2 days ago to be exact, and I have not done a War on Christmas segment. I've not done a single War on Christmas segment, but we're going to fix that. We have the War on Christmas, Bishop Robert Barron from Michael Knowles. So he's going to talk to a guy, I guess, I scrolled through a little bit, about the war on Christmas and what's happening with it. I'd just like to, and we do this every year. We've done this every year for like 20 years and counting. Like, every year it's the same thing. Oh my God, the woke left is coming after Christmas. You can't say Merry Christmas anymore without people getting on your ass. When I've literally never had a problem. I say Merry Christmas to people. People are like, okay, yeah, Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays. It doesn't matter. Like, nobody gives a shit except for conservatives. They're whiny bitches about it. They are such whiny little bitches about it. So we'll watch Michael Knowles and his friend over here be whiny bitches about saying Merry Christmas.
For those of you who don't know, Bishop Barron is not only the bishop of YouTube, Bishop Barron is also the bishop of Winona, Rochester in Minnesota. Your Excellency, I feel like I just saw you.
Well, you just did.
Your Excellency.
That's why. That's right. I was just up in Minnesota, and we had a marvelous conversation, as I always find our conversations to be marvelous. But a topic came up that we didn't have a chance to discuss too much. So I said, all right, we have to talk about it on the show for Theology Thursday. Your Excellency, people are going to expect us to talk about Advent.
Nerd shit.
Or about Christmas, which everyone is trying to rush along, or about Santa Claus or something. But I want to talk about something much more important.
Wait. Hold on. I didn't miss that little comment. Christmas, which everyone is trying to rush along. What does that mean? I don't understand. What does he mean by that?
Rush along. Or about...
I've never heard of anybody trying to rush along Christmas. If anything, the only thing I hear is I'm so sad that Christmas is over, and I'm so sad that the holiday season is over, and now we have to, like, slog through 6 months before any significant holidays come up. You know what I mean? Like, that's usually what I hear.
Santa Claus.
Nobody's trying to hurry it along.
But I want to talk about something much more important, and that is voluntarism. Does that work for you?
Well, it works for me for sure. It's a great issue.
Okay.
It's a great question.
This is your last chance.
What do you want to know about voluntarism?
Well, what I want to know is, while conservatives typically, we play this game. We say, when did things go off the rails? Was it in the...
I bet dollars to donuts this bishop loves the altar boys too much. Let's see if he's got any wild allegations against him or anything. Bishop Robert Barron. Let's see. For some reason in my head, I thought Bishop was part of his name, but alas, it is his stance in the church. Robert Emmett Barron is an American prelate of the Catholic Church who has served as Bishop of the Diocese of Winona, Rochester since 2022, founder of the Catholic ministerial organization Word on Fire, host of Catholicism, a documentary TV series about Catholicism that aired on PBS, published books, essays, and articles on theology and spirituality, religion correspondent for NBC, has also appeared on Fox News and CNN and EWTN. Oh, he's got YouTube videos. Interesting. Maybe we should look at those. I want to see if there's any controversy with him. Videos, television, radio broadcasts, books, DVDs. Okay, he seems pretty clean. Besides being an obvious conservative, but there you go. Okay, so he's just your stock, like, conservative mouthpiece.
The 1960s? No. It was in the 1830s? No. It was in the Enlightenment? No. It was in the French Revolution?
The 1360s.
It was the 1360s. There is this issue that has cropped up. And even as people discuss faith, sometimes they will say, well, look, faith means you can't reason about something. You know, faith is the absence of reason. Faith, you just have to take a leap of faith and forget about logic and reason. And some will attack that. The atheists will attack that. And some will defend. Some even Christians will attack faith. You just have to take a leap. Means you can't reason about something. You know, faith is the absence of reason. Faith, you just have to take a leap of faith and forget about logic and reason. And some will attack.
I thought conservatives were all about logic and reason and common sense. Why would I put faith in something that makes no logical sense? That's stupid.
That the atheists will attack that,
Yes.
and some will defend. Some even Christians will say, "No, it's fine. I've got my logic and my reason and my science over here, and I've just got
Yes.
my faith, my God's will over here."
You can't.
That's called-
Okay, listen. You can take the side of, I just have my faith and that's it. Fuck logic, reason, and science. I don't do that. I just have faith in God. Okay, you can do that, which I'm still going to insult you for that, but you can do that. You can take that stance. You cannot take that stance and then also be like, well, we're just bringing back common sense and reason and science and blah, de blah, and this and that. And just, it's biology that you're a man if you're a man, you're a woman. And what is a woman even? The scientific atheists can't answer what a woman, like, you can't do both. You can't do both. It's either you have faith in magical shit or you don't. Or you have science and logic and reason, okay? And if you want to play the bullshit science, logic, and reason and common sense shit for the trans question, as it were, you can do that. But then you can't turn around and be like, well, I just put my faith in God regardless of what science and logic and reason says. You can't do both.
Voluntarism.
Well, I mean, what you're raising there the faith reason problem. That's a very serious problem. And the roots of that go back at least to the Reformation, where Luther didn't hesitate to say that whore reason, because he wanted so to emphasize the Bible and so emphasize faith. He didn't like the scholastic method that used, reason. Well, of course, that's not the Catholic tradition at all. That's always said fides et ratio, faith and reason, and construes faith never as infra-rational or below reason, but supra-rational. It's beyond reason. Anything infra-rational, that's called silliness or superstition or stupidity or naivete. We're against that. The church is against anything below reason. But what's above reason? When reason becomes aware of its own limits. And that's a very interesting question philosophically.
When reason becomes aware of its own limits. What does that mean? Like, listen, humanity is an unreasonable species in general. We have inconsistencies. We're very flawed. We can't be reasoned with in a lot of departments of our psychology. That's just life, okay? So I understand that from that angle. But when you're talking about religion, that is going against logic and reason, okay? Whether you like it or not. If you want to say that that's super, what did he call it? Super reasonable?
That. The church is against anything below reason. But what's above or below reason? But screws faith never as infra-rational or below reason, but supra-rational. It's beyond
super
reason.
rational. Oh yeah, he calls it super rational. My faith is so beyond reason that it actually circled back around and it's better than reason. Like, that's stupid. That's bullshit, dude. You're bullshitting me.
Anything
Shut the fuck up.
infra-rational, that's called
You're
silliness
huffing your
or
own farts,
superstition
man.
or stupidity or naivete. We're against that. The church is against anything
We're
below
against
reason.
silliness, unless
But
it's our
what's above
silliness.
reason? When reason becomes aware of its own limits. And that's a very interesting question philosophically. Like, when the sciences become aware of their own limit, that's when things get really interesting. When you begin searching out in a kind of meta-questioning way, what are the conditions for the possibility of science? Now you're getting into something much more like mysticism, much closer to faith, if you want. So that's the right way to construe faith and reason.
Okay, to be as charitable as possible to him, I think I understand what he's getting at. There are questions that science, at least at this point in time, simply cannot answer. Like, what is consciousness? What is the meaning of life, right? Why do things exist? Is there any purpose to it, or is it just random? We don't know the answers to these things. But assuming that you do is not super rationality. It's just irrationality. You're being irrational. You don't know these things. You're just guessing. And if people can just say that they're guessing, that's fine. When I say, right, I've said in the past, when you die, I believe that your consciousness goes back into some kind of collective consciousness of the universe, okay? Like, you don't, experience doesn't cease to exist. It just exists in a way that's beyond our comprehension. Because in my head, it makes more sense that consciousness springs from a collective consciousness than that it springs from unconsciousness. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, I'm sorry. But my point is, that's a belief that I hold. And I can't prove that, and I don't really have a reason for believing it beyond it just makes sense to me. That's kind of my answer. But and I don't know that that's the case. I have no idea, and I can admit that. I don't know that you just go back to a collective universal consciousness. I don't know, okay? I can't say for sure. But Christians are like so sure. They're so certain that Yahweh is out there judging every little thing that you do. You know, they're just so sure about it. And that's the part that I have a problem with. If you could just admit, maybe there's not a God. Maybe there's not. You know, I could be bullshitting you. I could just be completely wrong. Then that's better. Okay? And I think that most people, even Christians, would be willing to admit that maybe there's not a God. But I believe that there is one and I'm worshiping him. That's fine. That's totally fine. But they're just so damn sure that there's a God for no reason. For no reason. And that's not super rational. That's just irrational. You're being irrational.
Voluntarism, in a way, you're right, is kind of a modality of that. The voluntarist position, which is very ancient, but boy, it crops up throughout the centuries and it's present today. And it's always a source of mischief, says, I'm going to privilege the divine will, voluntas, hence voluntarism, the divine will over the divine reason, over the divine mind. God is so sovereignly absolute that his will determines everything. Now, look at the upshot of that. How come 2 + 2 = 4? Well, God willed it.
How come the 2-year-old died of cancer? Well, God willed it. God just willed it.
How come adultery is a sin? Well, God decided. Could God decide 2 + 3 = 5? Sure, he's God after all. Could adultery be a virtue? Sure, if God determined. Well, you can find that position all throughout the tradition in certain extremist folks. The Catholic tradition has always militated powerfully against it because it turns God into an arbitrary tyrant and it
Sorry, I gotta go back a little bit.
The Catholic tradition has always militated powerfully against it because it turns God into an arbitrary tyrant and it causes us to lose complete confidence in anything like reason.
No, sorry. I grew up Catholic. This is bullshit. I grew up Catholic and I remember learning that God is in fact a tyrant. And if you're gay, you're going to hell. That's tyrannical. Okay. Yeah. Yahweh is a tyrant.
If 2 + 2 could be 5, well, then how do I know anything in mathematics or geometry or whatever? Yeah, I think we talked about this the other day. Look in certain extreme forms of woke.
By the way, 2 + 2 = 4 because that makes the most sense to us as humans. And that helps us the most. Okay? In mathematics, and in any field of study for that matter, only the things that benefit us the most as humans is true. You know what I mean? Like the understanding, like in my view, scholarly study, which I know we're talking about 2 + 2 = 4, but bear with me. Scholarly study only is only valuable insofar as it benefits humanity. You know, like does that make sense? I'm sorry, the edible's starting to hit a little bit, but my point is like we don't say that 2 + 2 = 5 because it doesn't help us at all. I have 2 things over here. I have 2 things over here. 1, 2, 3, 4. That makes 4, and I communicate that idea to other people that I now have 4 objects in front of me because I have 2 on the left side and 2 on the right side. And that is in order to communicate that idea to people, we both have to have a mutual understanding that 2 + 2 = 4. If 2 + 2 = 5, all you're saying is that now the word 4 is being switched over to 5. We're not changing the concept. We're just changing the terminology. 5 would literally just be 4 with a different word attached to it. We're communicating the same idea though. It's all about how we're communicating the summation of those 2 parts. So that's why we say 2 + 2 = 4.
Where you have even mathematics is being questioned as a
wokeism. Wait, okay, we're getting into it.
Yeah, I think we talked about this the other day. Look in certain extreme forms of wokeism where you have even mathematics is being questioned as a kind of expression of patriarchy.
How?
That's in its own way an expression of voluntarism. The church stands athwart.
Okay, I haven't heard of this with mathematics being expressed as a form of patriarchy. If that's a thing, I'd like to know more about it because that seems silly to me. But I could be wrong. You know, maybe there is an element of math that is patriarchal in nature, but I haven't heard of this. If anybody could expand on that, I'd appreciate it. Leave your comment down below. Here's my hook to leave comments. Leave your comment down below to explain why mathematics is a form of patriarchy.
Voluntarism.
Or why
The
there's patriarchy
solution,
in
if you want,
mathematics. I
is
don't
in
know.
our hero Thomas Aquinas, who sees the divine mind and divine will basically coinciding. See, will is a modality of mind. What I mean there, what Thomas means, is the good, once known as good, is ipso facto willed. That's what the will is a modality of the intellect. When the intellect knows the good as good,
Hold the up. Sorry, maybe I'm just not smart enough for this, but
it's
I gotta
known
watch that
as
again.
good is ipso facto willed. That's what the will is a modality of the intellect. When the intellect knows the good as good, it wants it, it desires it. So what's
Okay.
God's will? It's the same as the divine mind. God knows himself as supremely good, and so he wills his good. That's why the divine
Okay, but all you're saying is that anything that God sees as good is in fact good. And all that means is, well, the way that you justify anything as being good is that God said it is. And that's a very shallow view of spirituality.
mind and will coincide. When they
Leads
split
to a lot of
apart,
dangerous
as they do in
things.
voluntarism, all kinds of mischief ensues.
Right now, go to Hal. The first time I ever even encountered the notion of voluntarism was actually not from within the Christian tradition or even the liberal political tradition or wokeism or whatever. It was in Pope Benedict's Regensburg address when he was discussing Islam. And he was quoting a medieval Islamic writer, Ibn Hazm, who said that Allah is totally transcendent, such that if Allah willed for you to worship idols, you ought to do that. And that this is different than the Christian version, which understands our Lord as the divine logic of the universe.
Wait. That's not different at all. You understand the Lord as the divine logic of the universe. That's literally the same thing. Is that not the same thing? He literally was just like, well, they view, you see, the Muslims over there, the stupid, silly Muslims, view Allah as like this divine entity that can just say whatever is correct or not, and that's just how it is. But we Christians over here, we know better. Like, no, the fuck you don't. You do the same shit. It's all the same shit. It's the same thing. Understand our Lord as the divine logic of the universe. That's the same thing that you just said is Muslims do. That's literally, unless I'm misunderstanding.
For you to worship idols, you ought to do that. And that this is different than the Christian version, which understands our Lord as the divine logic of the universe.
Yes, so if your divine Lord of the universe said to worship idols, and that's a good thing to worship idols, then you would do it. But because he said, no, don't do that. And by the way, the only reason you think it's a bad thing is because he said, no, don't do that. Okay? Just so you know.
As the Logos. So I always considered it to be some foreign thing, but you do see it crop up within even the broad Christian tradition.
You do indeed. And that's a very interesting test case of it. And that's exactly what happens. When you give pride of place to voluntas, to will, well, then the thing is open-ended. That's why is Descartes, who was certainly a Christian, certainly a believer, it said, yes, 2 plus 2 could be equal to 5 if God so desired. But that means something's broken apart in our fundamental metaphysics. The metaphysics, again, it's that of Aquinas, which is the divine simplicity. God is not a being, but ipsum esse, the sheer act of to be itself.
If God were, okay, so if let's assume for a second that the Christian God is real, and God wills that 2 plus 2 does in fact equal 5. All that means is that you're changing the laws of physics. And if you change the laws of physics, and 2 plus 2 does in fact equal 5, you take 2 things over here, 2 things over here, and somehow when you put them together, that makes 5. If that's the reality you're living in, then that's how you have to communicate that to other people. I had 2 things over here. I had 2 things over here. When you put them together, it makes 5 things. And I'm communicating to you that I now have 5 things. Like it's not just because God said so. It's because you're literally changing the laws of physics. Like what you're saying, like, am I making sense? I feel like I am. Like it's a very complicated conversation to have, but it's about what we're communicating to each other as humans. That's what's important. Yeah, if you could take 2 things over here and 2 things over here and make 5 things in the middle, then that would make sense to communicate that, yes, in fact, I am making 5 things.
In and through which all things come to be. So we're creatures through the power of God sustaining us. Well, that means, furthermore, that the divine truth, logos, can be discerned in creation. as I look, mathematics, science, psychology, sociology, any of the logoi are reflections of the supreme logos of God. That's the ground for that whole approach to faith and reason, and that gives us confidence in knowing the world. A voluntarism undermines that because now logos is subordinated to will, and so things are up for grabs. Why did the sciences emerge
I'm not absorbing most of this. I'm just going to be honest.
when
It's a lot
and
of
where
words,
they did,
man.
precisely out of the Christian universities? Because of this supreme
He's probably making
confidence that
sense.
the
I
world
just-
is marked by logos in every nook and cranny. That's the mysticism underneath any science. You have to assume I'm going to meet a world that's marked by objective intelligibility. Well, that's grounded in the logos of the creator God. If separate logos and voluntas, that all falls apart.
What's voluntas? I know, I loosely know logos, but I don't know voluntas.
Now, welcome
think
in
you
some
explained
ways
it
to
earlier and I
a
missed
lot
it.
of the excesses of the modern world came from a breakdown in what we call a participation metaphysics. That's what Aquinas was defending.
So how is that the case? Because there are going to be a lot of
I
people
understand
listening
almost none
who
of that.
say, all right, well, this is interesting enough, but, does it really matter in my everyday? I don't think about
Yes.
metaphysics.
Yes,
I say my
does matter.
prayers. I do my job. How does it matter?
Right. Well, here's how. We are meant to imitate God. That's what it means to live an upright life, is that you live in imitation of God.
But
What does that
why? Why? That's so gross. You're meant to imitate God. How about I just be myself and live my life how I want? What the f do you mean imitate God? That's that's disgusting to me.
look like on a Thomas reading? It looks like I'm going to discern the objective values that are out there in the world, the good, the true, and the beautiful. And I'm going to try to bring my interiority into line with those objectivities. So I'm going to become the person God wants me to be, and those intelligibilities are on display within nature. Okay, that's a classically Catholic view. Now, take the opposite. If the voluntarist God is supreme, will is the supreme thing, well, then I should imitate that. My will becomes the determiner of
Yeah.
being and truth and meaning and value.
Yeah, that's
Hey,
good.
what's good? Well, I mean, don't you tell me. There's good for you, good for me. I've decided my value system. You decide your value system.
But hold on, you're kind of mutating that, because when you're talking about what's good for me, it could be very well different from what's good for somebody else. Like maybe I really want to play violin. That's what I do. That I play the violin. Maybe somebody else wants to be a streamer. Like who the fuck would do that? I don't know. Maybe somebody else wants to be a caretaker. Like what you like. I know he's talking about value system, but like I feel like he's kind of mixing these two ideas of like what's good for me. Am I making any sense here? I don't know if I am. I'm sorry. I took an edible and I feel like it's kicking in. But like, I feel like he's mixing the idea of like what's good for me is like also what I want to do. I think it's universally understood that like having the freedom to do what you want to do is what's good, right? Here, let me just watch this again. I'm sorry.
Truth and meaning and value. Hey, what's good? Well, I mean, don't you tell me. There's good for you, good for me. I've decided my value system. You decide your value system. No, well,
Okay, so he's talking about value systems, but like I feel like as a collective, we need to understand that maximizing freedom is like the best value system. Like if you're trying to restrict other people's freedoms, it's basically just don't do unto others what you would not want done unto you. So if you're restricting other people's freedoms, well, you wouldn't want your freedoms restricted, would you? Right? Like you should be allowed to do whatever you want, provided you're not restricting the freedoms of others. That's how I decide my value system. And I don't need a God to do that.
welcome to wokeism. Welcome to the world that we largely inhabit. See, I would argue, Michael, that voluntarism is the default epistemology of most teenagers in the West today, right? I'm like a little god or goddess. I determine the meaning of my life. But see,
Yes.
the whole point of classical spirituality is not that awful game, but now to bring my life into alignment with objective, moral, intellectual.
Where do we get woke from? He's saying that it is woke to be self-actualized rather than to adhere to what God tells you to do. That's what he's saying. He's saying following your own trajectory rather than that of a God that he can't prove exists. Like, that's woke to him. That's woke to him, which is stupid. You should do whatever the fuck you want to do. Don't worry about what God's plan is for you. Don't worry about that.
Intellectual and aesthetic value. So it has a huge effect. I think in many ways the patron saint of modern voluntarism would be Nietzsche, right?
Yes.
God is dead. Okay, once God is dead, well, now I'm beyond good and evil, right? Another book of Nietzsche's. If I'm beyond good and evil, what's left?
No. Being self-actualized is not being beyond good and evil. Being able to determine for yourself what's good for your own life, minus what other people think of that. As long as you're not infringing on the will of anybody else, like the freedoms of anybody else to do that, like, that's fine. You don't need a God to tell you what you ought to do with your life. You have to determine that for yourself, as long as you're not hurting other people.
Ubermensch, the supreme will, right?
What?
So I'm going to impose my will as much as I can. You'll do the same thing. What do we have? A conflictual society. Again, welcome to much of wokeism. Is a sort of popularization of Nietzsche mediated through Foucault, who was one of Nietzsche's great disciples. So my point is, I'm glad you pressed it, is these seemingly, arcane logics.
What will are our woke people imposing on other people? What am I saying that other people cannot do? I'd love an answer to that. You're allowed to be Christian. You're allowed to believe in God. You're allowed to say Merry Christmas instead of Happy Holidays. That's all fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Also, isn't this supposed to be about the war on Christmas, by the way? Like, I feel like we're getting way off track here, but that's just me.
Chopping medieval debates have huge implications for our situation today.
And even you mentioned Nietzsche. This means that this is not merely a problem for the political left. I mean, I'm all for taking shots at the left, and I do it frequently. But this also becomes a problem for the right, because there are people...
Things like saying that trans people deserve to be genocided and not exist, right?
Who are in thrall of Nietzsche.
Just,
or there are
fun
people
shots
who
at the
come
left.
out of even certain aspects of Protestantism that seem to favor a more voluntarist view of things, who I think will... just even unthinkingly embrace that understanding of God, if they believe in God.
Can I make a perhaps provocative statement? What we call left and right in our political situation can often be just debates within a fundamentally modernist point of view.
Yeah.
And what I'm advocating, and here I'd stand with people like Russell Kirk, it's that kind of conservatism that I would embrace. Because in a way, he tended to say a plague on both your houses, because he didn't want just to have a debate between elements of modernism. He wanted this classical view that's really different from the modern view. And even as that splits between more liberal and more conservative, what's needed is
opposed to the modern?
a really different point of view. And I would say now, speaking as a Catholic bishop and theologian, one that comes up out of this very integrated participation metaphysics.
I find that's beautiful. When I argue with...
I'm sorry, I didn't understand a lot of that. I'm just going to keep going, but like, if he said something wrong there, I am against it, and if not, then I'll remain silent.
Some of my friends, even on the right, I find myself viewing left and right sometimes as just two sides of the same coin of a fundamentally liberal modernity. So, and modernity, which looks back and mocks the scholastics, metaphysicians like St. Thomas Aquinas, and say, they're all just quibbling over how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. But it actually seems to me, I think it matters how many angels can, and it matters at least what an angel is, doesn't it?
What?
Yes, and of course, what you're putting your finger on there is a tendency within largely Protestant historiography, intellectual historiography, to mock the Middle Ages, to mock all this medieval superstition. Well, come on, anyone that reads the serious scholastics with an open mind realizes these are some of those brilliant people that the West produced, and they were wrestling with questions that, as we've been saying, have huge implications for now. Here's another one, if I could just be brief about it: the question of freedom. Right, we're Americans. We're the land of the free, and we believe in.
Does the priest even know he's talking to a guy that hates minorities and wants Christian nationalist states that hate peaceful Christians? Yes, probably.
Freedom, Well, so does the great Catholic tradition, but it tends to.
The great Catholic tradition believes in freedom. Yeah, totally, dude. They weren't like flogging themselves back in the day for like masturbating. That was never a thing.
True freedom in a different way. On a more modern reading, that's why I said 1360, because people like Duns Scotus and William of Ockham.
Okay, that means that I can be gay, right?
What's freedom? Well, it's hovering above the yes and the no, and on the basis of no constraint, external or internal, I decide. I decide I go A or B. But see, that's not Aquinas' understanding of freedom at all. It's not arbitrary self-determination. It's rather
Freedom is the ability to do what you would like to do, minus how that infringes upon other people's freedom. That's how I'll say, okay, I think there's a distinction between freedom and liberty, where it's like you could argue freedom includes the ability to impede other people's freedom, but liberty is what I'm concerned with, which is freedom minus, like, barring the ability to impede on other people's freedom. Liberty. I like the idea of liberty for people, freeing them up to do things like indulge in their hobbies, or not have to slave away at their job, right? Or, take a trip if they want. That's freedom. That's liberty. But I don't consider it liberty to go and somebody or unalive somebody, I guess, since, YouTube doesn't like the word now or whatever. And he's trying to say that, like, Catholics believe in freedom. Well, no, they don't. You don't believe in the freedom for gay people to marry who they want. It doesn't hurt anybody. You don't believe in the freedom for trans people to transition to their preferred gender. You don't believe in that freedom. You don't believe in the freedom to masturbate. Like, masturbation is a very natural, fun thing that people do. I'm sure these two heads do it. You don't believe in those freedoms, though. So no, you do not have a tradition of freedom or whatever the fuck you said.
A kind of disciplining or focusing of desire so as to make the achievement of the good possible and then effortless. So, for example, you're a very free speaker of English. It's not because you speak any way you want, but rather you allowed the syntax and grammar and vocabulary and people like Shakespeare and so many others to guide your freedom so that now you can say whatever you want. You can express anything you want.
You just said it's not because you can say anything you want. Now you're saying, well, now you can say anything you want. Yeah, in order to communicate ideas to other people, I have to have a foundation for that. But once I have that foundation, then I can use it to say whatever I want. Yeah, he's being very confusing.
The same with the moral life. It's not I decide to live any way I want to. No, I've discerned objective moral values, and now I've so disciplined my will to conform to them that now being good is relatively easy to me. That's freedom, right? I'm free from attachment so as to be free for the achievement of the good. That view of freedom, that's classical. That's Aristotle, that's Aquinas, that's the Bible. The other one, I'm afraid, came roaring up into modernity, out of the late Middle Ages into the moderns. And then you find this view of freedom as spontaneity. Well, again, welcome to the mindset of every teenager in the West, is that my freedom means I decide what my life is. No,
yeah, minus impeding on other people's freedom. Yes, that is what freedom is. That's what liberty is to decide whatever your life is.
Freedom is in the beautiful adventure when guided by a mentor, you discern objective values, and then you learn how to bring your life into line with them. Now,
what objective values are you speaking of? I'd like to know. Like, I agree that we shouldn't kill people. As long as you're not, again, I feel like I'm on a broken record here, but, like, as long as you're not impeding on the people on the freedom of other people, you can do whatever you want. Yeah, I believe in that.
We're talking. Now we're on the road to real happiness, and not just an adolescent self-expression.
Yes, I remember I encountered this when I was reading Donoso Cortez, the counter-revolutionary writer, who made this point.
He's
and
talking
a point
in circles
that
of being a
Dante
square.
makes earlier.
Nice.
This is a point that the ancients make quite clearly, that freedom is not neutrality of choice, but that freedom is willing predicated on knowing, meaning that it is grounded in the truth. And
that's Aquinas.
And the way it clicked for me, sometimes I'm a little bit slow, having had my very modern liberal education, liberal in the unfortunate sense, not the classical sense. I said, how do I make sense of this? And Cortez points out, if freedom were merely just neutral choosing, then we would be freer than God, because God does not sin. God does not. So, but I'm pretty sure I'm not freer than God.
I'm freer than God.
Therefore, I must conclude the old version's right.
Right. That's a very interesting observation. Aquinas in the Summa entertains the question whether God can...
Okay, I'm very bored. I thought this would be more Christmas related. I'm sorry that it wasn't. But I guess what I'm taking from this is, I don't know. I don't know what to take from this, honestly. I just think that you should be free to live your life however you want, as long as you're not impeding on the freedom of others. And I don't need a God to tell me to do good things. So that's all I have to say about it. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you want to see more, hit the notification bell to be notified when I upload. If you enjoy my content, you enjoy what I do, I really appreciate any financial help that I can get. Go to youtube.com/AlecGunterTTV/join. You got some awesome benefits, such as seeing early videos, awesome emotes that you can use in the comments of YouTube videos, and a sweet badge next to your name. So if that sounds interesting to you, I'd really appreciate if you join. It is cheaper than the cost of a blowjob from your mom. So with all that being said, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.